Hello, good day, and welcome. Let's talk about getting a better result. We all want a better result in our project. Sometimes when you do a realistic preview, it looks great, and then when you go to stitch it out, not so great. So we're going to try to fix some of that. There's lots of tips. I'm probably not going to cover them all because honestly, I'm probably not going to remember to cover them all, but I'm going to try to cover some of the major ones. There was a couple of posts. I lurk on Reddit and search Inkstitch and answer questions now and then, and somebody asked a question about Inkstitch, and most of the replies were, you should use Hatch. Really? How about if you don't know the answer, you don't comment? Because the question wasn't anything to do with Hatch. But anyway, I digress. Another post, I think this one was on Facebook. He or she, I can't remember. The post got deleted. Unfortunately, I was going to ask that poster if I could use the video or the pictures in this video, in this very video right here. But the post had gotten deleted by the user because I'm the only one that can delete posts other than whoever posted it. It really made me think, both of those posts made me think I need to cover getting better results. And you'll be able to change your results a lot in params. I don't know if I can bring up params because I don't have anything. So let's make something real quick. And let's make another something real quick, and we'll kind of run those two together. Maybe make it a different color. I think I need to increase the opacity, which I do. Click that one, increase opacity, and now we're good. Oh, you know what? Okay. I gotta do this. I just gotta do that. Nope. I'm going to Control D, duplicate, and then select that. Path difference. I just had to do that. And there it's cut out. Okay. Now we can continue on. One of the things... Okay, let's go into params. Let's just go straight in. One of the things you don't want to do, and most digitizers will tell you, don't run the angle of your stitches in the same direction as the stitches of the clothing. So in other words, when you hoop it, if the threads in your fabric are going horizontal and up and down, don't stitch embroidery horizontal and up and down. As a basic rule. Not as a be-all, end-all rule, but kind of as a basic rule. So what we're going to do, we're going to go into Inkstitch, and this will almost always give you a better result right off the bat. So right here on angle lines of stitches, we're going to change that angle line of stitches, and I'm going to use 45. Why 45? I don't know. That's just the number that I like. And that's the number that I usually use. 45-degree angle sounds good. So now you can see, I hope you can see, the stitches are going at a 45-degree angle, including the underlay. So what's good with that, about that, is if you think of I've tried this before. So if you think a 45-degree angle, and then a 90 and a 180. Am I thinking right? Yeah. And then 180 twice is 360, right? No, 180. I don't know. Never mind. I have a hard time with angles. That's why I'm a truck driver, which uses angles every moment of the day in order to make sure I don't wreck the trailer. But we won't talk about that. So now I'm going to... Oh, did I save that? Let me go back into that real quick. Let me shut my mouth and go into that real quick. Okay, 45-degree angle. I did. So on this side, we want to do an opposite than a 45-degree angle. Go into params. And then Is it 360 minus 45? Is that what the number I want? $315. That's, I don't think that's right. Ooh, that definitely is not right. I might have done that right. I think I did that right. Okay. So now we're going to look at both of these to see if I did that right. Okay. Angle stitching there, angle stitch. I did do that right. How about that? Okay. So now you can see there's a lot of angle here and the opposite angle over here. Now that will stitch out actually really nicely. And if you're stitching both of these horizontally, you're gonna, even though it's a fill stitch, you're still gonna have some pull effect. So keep that in mind. The same pull effect that you have in a satin stitch, you'll have it in a fill stitch. So keep that in mind. Now with changing the angles like I did, that will decrease that pull a little bit. Now something else that will help. I'm going to select both of these. Going to Inkstitch params. This is something I do on almost everything that I work on. And it really is something that both the angle stitching and the spacing between rows is something that we as tutorialists, I don't think talk about enough. I know I don't talk about it enough. When you change the angle of stitching, you automatically improve your stitch out. It looks better, even if it doesn't stitch out any better, it still looks better because now you're playing with angles and it's not just flat. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so the other thing that you want to look at is spacing between rows. Almost always when I'm doing something for the business, almost always I will change spacing between rows. I will take that 5 off of that default 0.25. I'll take the 5 off of that and change it to 0.2. There is one minor caveat with that. See how I think you can see that it's a lot denser. There is one caveat. The more you lower the spacing between rows on your fill stitch, the more that the underlay is also filling in, because the underlay by default goes times 3. So the default on spacing between rows is 0.25. Times 3 of that is 0.75. When you change it to 0.2, now times 3 of that is 0.6, which is a lot less, or a lot more dense of a change than what you changed on the fill stitch side. So in your fill underlay, you may, if you're only doing a 0.2 like I just showed you, you're probably okay, but you can change your underlay row spacing right here to whatever you want it to be. Default of 0.25 results in an underlay row spacing of 0.75, and now I've changed it to 0.2, it's 0.6, so you could take it back to 0.75, which is the original default. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I just go to 1. Depending on how big my fill stitch is going to be, I may just go to 1. Now you can see that underlay is very spaced out, but the overlay is still very dense, and that usually turns out pretty good. I'm going to hit apply and quit, and then we're going to go to a realistic preview. I'm going to fast forward this. You can see that there's a lot of spacing on the underlay. Hit realistic. It's really hard to tell. I'm not sure why Inkstitch does this off color, even though it's the same color stitching. I don't know why Inkstitch does that, but it does. But you can see that looks pretty good. And it actually doesn't look like my angles are correct now. Just saying. So, anyway, you get the idea. That'd be a little pause jump in that. I had to get some coffee. Yes, it's not long before bedtime. Okay, where was I? Okay, speaking of the pull effect, on Satin Stitch you have something called pull compensation that will actually add width, because the pull effect will pull the sides of the Satin Stitch in just a little bit, so you compensate in the program by setting it out usually 0.1, 0.2 millimeters, a little bit wider as a number. We'll get to that in a minute. But you kind of sort of have the same thing on a fill stitch. So I'm going to just select one of them and go back into params. If you're stitching it out, especially if you have a fill next to a fill or something like that, you can compensate if it's got a gap in between. Like if I stitch this piece out that I have right now, if I stitch this out, there would probably be just the slightest little gap right there. If I set the stitching to be horizontal, it wouldn't be there because the pull effect would go away. It'd be pulling up and down. But I want my angle at a 45 like I've got. So what you can do is go into params, and right here on expand, that is kind of the same thing as pull compensate. The only problem is it doesn't just expand in the direction of the fill stitching. It expands your whole fill piece. And I will show you by exaggerating a number here. We'll do an expand of 5. You want to do an expand of a 0.2 or a 0.3. But just to exaggerate it, I'm going to show you a 5. So you can see my underlay is still where it was, but you can see how much more that expand number has filled out. And like I said, usually you'll do a 0.2, 0.3, something like that. And if you have two fills next to each other, usually 0.1 on one of them, 0.1 on the other one, and you'll be just fine. And you can see just the slightest little extra edge over here. So that's kind of the same thing, except it does it on the whole thing all the way around. I believe that pretty well covers fill stitching and params. I'm going to hit apply and quit. We're going to go into this one and set the same, or set it to something. Expand 0.1. Hit apply and quit. Now, okay, it didn't go away, so we're still working. I must have freaked it out by closing it out too soon. It kept it. Okay. All right. So, something else that you'll look at in that Reddit thread that I was talking about. One of the comments that was made about Hatch is, in Hatch you can change the angle of your fill stitching. I just showed you how to do that in Inkstitch. They also said in Hatch you can change the start and end location of a fill stitch. Well, let me show you. Go to extensions. Oh, hold on. Select one of your objects. Go to extensions, Inkstitch, commands. Attach command to selected objects. I'm going to turn off trim because that's not something I'm trying to set right now. Fill stitch starting position, fill stitch ending position. What do you know? We have it too. Hit apply, and you'll see a little stop icon and a little play icon. That's where it's going to start. That's where it's going to end. I'm going to change it to start over here, and I'm going to change it to end. Okay, we're going to change it to end right about there. So if we go into params and watch that happen, it started right here, and it's going to end right here where I've got the little icon. And what you can do with that is I'm going to go into this one and do the same thing. Inkstitch, commands, attach command to selected object, hit apply. Sometimes there are occasions to where when you stitch it out, for some reason that last stitch line does not stitch, and you'll have a blank spot where it should be a stitch. Sometimes changing the angle of your stitching will fix that, and if that doesn't fix it, changing your start and end points usually will fix it. So I'm going to put my start right about where the other start is, and I'm going to put my stop just kind of on the opposite side of it. Okay, let's go into the full visual. And it's kind of going to stitch just in this general direction. Started right there. It's going to end right there. That one started right there, and it's going to end right there. Awesome. It's exactly what I told it to do. And I did the little expand on it so you can see where now in the realistic preview you can see there's just a little bit of overlap. So that's a few things that you can do to help create a better fill stitch result. So I did see on the GitHub Inkstitch discussion forum, I guess it's called, that somebody has brought up the idea of being able to set our own defaults, which I would love, because I'm always changing those numbers. Every time I load it up, I have to change those numbers. So if there was a way to set my own defaults, that would be awesome. Maybe a button down here at the bottom in case you really mess it up to reset defaults, and it all goes back to the defaults, the original defaults. But I'm hoping, it has been commented to me before that at least one or more Inkstitch developers watch my channel. So if they're watching, that would be awesome. Just saying, it'd be awesome. It's already awesome, but that would be more awesome. Okay. I guess we can move on to, let's move on to Satin Stitch. Everybody's favorite Satin Stitch. I'm just going to do it like I always do it. I'm going to, actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to make my own. Just like that. You can do a satin stitch by nodes. As long as your lines have the same number of nodes, it'll work. Or you can, if it doesn't, you just add rails. You combine them all together and go into params. Tell it that you want that to be a satin stitch, and now it's a satin stitch. Amazing and awesome. So on the satin stitch, you have this zigzag spacing peak to peak. It is a default of 0.4. I am almost always changing that default, or changing that off of default, to either 0.3 or 0.35, depending on how wide my satin stitch is. And if I'm going to be doing a puff on a hat, I'll probably change it to about a 0.3, because my width on that satin stitch, it's going to be pretty large, so I'll probably change it to a 0.3 or a 0.25. Whenever I create a design and I stitch it out, I just stitch out a sample and show it to my wife. If it's got a satin stitch in it and I forget to change this number, almost inevitably she will ask me, why does that line look so jagged? Because I didn't change this number, which I know to do, but if I forget to, she reminds me. That's what wives are for, right? I have a good wife. I really do. Yes, she's standing right behind me. No, I do. Okay, so 0.35, depending on how wide your satin stitch is. 0.3 if you've got a really wide satin stitch. So just changing those numbers. Now don't go too low because your machine's going to hate you. And again, it depends on how wide your satin stitch is, how wide the column is. So I made this one pretty wide. I didn't measure it out, but I think it's pretty wide. So we'll measure it out. Oh yeah, a 0.6 mil wide. That's super wide. So that's definitely definitely deserving of a 0.3 or 0.25 even. So we'll go into the visual real quick. If I can find the right, there we go. Going to zoom that out, and then we're going to hit realistic, and you can see that's a pretty dense stitching. That is definitely a setting that I would probably use if I was doing puff. If I wasn't doing puff, I might not set it quite that dense, but stitch it out and see how it looks. But the 0.4 default looks kind of jagged. It's just ever so close to being right. Let's go in here to params. Missed it. What did I set it to? 0.3. We'll change it to 0.35. That is what I set most of the time. That is what I'm setting my satin stitch to. And you can see that looks pretty good. If I was to zoom in, you can see there's just a little bit of spacing in there, and then it just falls back up. It depends on the thickness of your thread. It really does. Satin stitch and running stitches kind of work together, sorta. I did have somebody ask me, what's the purpose of the running stitches? So I will show you. We're just gonna make. This is a tree. This is a plant. I don't know why it's laying down sideways. Let's turn our plant right side up. Okay. That looks better. Now it's a plant or a tree. Okay, so I'm going to take all of those things that I just did. We're going to set a width. Stroke, width. 2 mil. Yeah, it's good. Extensions, Inkstitch, satin, tools, satin, convert line to satin. So, if I stitch this out in this order, there's going to be a lot of jump stitches or a lot of trims. And remember, the less trims your machine has to do, the better. You're better off using that tiny little bit of thread to go from one point to another than you are trimming. When your machine trims, it has to slow down, it has to stop, it has to cut, it has to move the thread out of the way, and then it picks up again. And it starts out slow, it has to tie off, yada yada, you get it. So with running stitches, and I'm going to show you that just by doing, oh wait a minute, I'm just going to go ahead and do a words. Go ahead and do a visual. And speed this up. So now you see all these ugly little jump stitches. Yeah. Now, it's already all highlighted. If we go in here, Inkstitch, Tool Satin, Auto Route Satin Columns, I could do it manually. But usually that auto route works pretty good. You can see it changed the design a little bit. The entire thing has been auto routed. Okay, it's starting with that. So there's the first running stitch up to the top. Did another running stitch over here, another running stitch over here, and then satin stitches back down, which covers up the running stitch so you don't see it, hides it. Outstanding. I see it now. I get it. And that's going to jump to the bottom, come up, and satin stitch out. Alrighty. So that's the purpose of the running stitch when you're doing a satin stitch. And it will make your piece look better. If you can do the running stitches, even if your machine won't trim according to Inkstitch, if you do the running stitches instead of jumps, when you trim that thread, it's really hard to get up against the fabric without cutting threads. Oops. So instead of having that little piece of thread sticking out, using running stitches underneath the design, it just kind of makes it look more professional, really and truly. And I guess one of the last things I can think of right now on the satin stitch, we're talking about that pull effect. If you're using a satin stitch with a border, as a border rather, then it might pull away from whatever you're bordering. If it does, or if you're doing two satin columns next to each other, they might pull away from each other. Right, here's your pull compensation. Usually set that to about 0.2, should be good, somewhere in that neighborhood. And apply and quit. Hopefully that'll get you better results when you do a stitch out. Keep in mind, we do have a Facebook group. Just search for Inkstitch. I have a Reddit group that's not anywhere near as active, but it's there. 200 people, 200 or so, 250 members right now. So there is that. If you don't do Facebook, I understand. There is the Reddit option. That's it for this one. Please like and subscribe and make an old trucker happy. And until next time, thanks for watching, guys.